Welcome to the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse, where host Michael Leiner talks to the best in the business about community, impact, business, and donuts. Here's your host, Michael Leiner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse. I have a very distinguished guest today, one of my closest friends in the world, but more than that, somebody who I feel like I've kind of grown up with in the legal practice, Allen Tittle. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Allen.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I feel like this is what we do all the time, except there's not normally people watching. So this is kind of a fun opportunity for us. Just if you could, just so you know, the people who aren't familiar with you, tell us a little bit about what you do and your background.
Yeah, so, I have a personal injury practice, and my focus is on catastrophic injury cases. And what that means is we do a lot of medical malpractice, a lot of nursing home neglect, but also some high-end, big injury cases. So we're talking, from a natural gas explosion to, a significant car crash.
When you think back to law school or even before, would you have predicted that this is the career trajectory that you would be on, that this is what you'd be doing every day?
I don't know if I knew the practice area, but I had an idea. I always wanted to be a litigator, and I always wanted to own my own law firm eventually. The problem is when you grew up where I grew up or how I grew up, I didn't really know what a lawyer did. I went to law school, and I thought, I wanted to be a constitutional law lawyer. That's not even a real thing. So, you sort of learn that first year of law school, all right, what is that? What do you really sort of mesh with? And so, fortunately, I ended up clerking for a personal injury firm in law school. And that's sort of how I found the passion for what I do today.
And when you talk a little bit about your background and not knowing where it would lead, where are you from?
The beautiful town of Huron, Ohio. There's no greater place on earth than Huron, Ohio.
Yeah. And what is it about Huron that, or was it just your upbringing that, like, the idea of what a lawyer is wasn't, like, in the forefront for you?
Well, I had some friends whose fathers were lawyers, but no one in my family was a lawyer. No one in my family had gone to college, let alone be a lawyer. So I really didn't have a good feel for what the broad sort of horizon that a lawyer could have. I had no idea.
When you were a child, I'm just interested because you've said how you always knew that you wanted to, like, be a lawyer. You wanted to own your own law firm. Was it like television shows that you watched then, or what was it about?
No, so in 8th grade,
Okay.
social studies class, we did a mock trial. And I was chosen to be one of the litigators.
I was so good at mock trial.
Yeah.
Way better than I am at actually being a lawyer.
Right. But, so we did a few cases. And the first case we did was a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, which was the Supreme Court case that said separate but equal of races was legal. Now, my teacher put me on the side of Ferguson, Judge Ferguson, which ruled that separate but equal was allowable. Now, that side's not supposed to win. Yet I convinced my class that to sort of rule in our favor, because my catch line in 8th grade was Homer Plessy was a troublemaker. He set out that day to make trouble. And it's not what was supposed to happen. But then a few weeks later, we did the opposite case of Brown v. Board, which overturned that case. And this time, my teacher put me on the right side because she knew I was going to win. And I convinced my class the complete opposite. We're talking within a couple weeks, period of time. And I thought, wow, a lawyer has the ability and the power to really make change, not only in your client's life, but in society. So that's sort of how I always wanted to be a trial attorney.
Were you a troublemaker?
I was not a troublemaker.
Okay.
I was not a troublemaker.
So did you argue with other people a lot?
No, but I was passionate about the things I was passionate about.
Yeah.
I remember one time I was a bellman in college. That was one of my summer
Like
jobs.
a bellman in a hotel?
Yeah, I was a bellman in a hotel. And my boss at the time, she pulls me aside. She's like, "You are the most intense person I've ever met in my life." Well, I was intense about getting my tips. I got a job to do. And I think that just carries over in whatever I do is, you want to have that mindset of intensity, because if you don't, I don't know how you can be successful.
And it's so interesting that you've never told me that story about being a bell person, but I just know the way that you approach your practice, and I feel like I'm very committed and very committed to working hard and making sure that the things around me are done. But sometimes I'm telling you, dude, you gotta chill a little bit. You need to, I mean, for years I was telling you need to take a vacation or do something because I get worried about your stress level. But um, just that background there is so interesting. One thing that has always, now you started your firm was in 2013, the same year as I did,
It
right?
was 2015. So
2015.
you had a little head start.
Okay, but maybe I had a head start. I didn't feel like I had gotten that far by the time you and I met. I mean, we met right when you started your practice.
Yes.
I think.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, like, the first time we ever did something was we went to like we met somewhere, but then we went to this Thai restaurant that was by the office that you had in Lakewood.
Yep.
And I mean, I think that we'd only budgeted like 45 minutes for lunch, but we sat there for the longest time. I was like, this guy gets it. And there's not too many people that I've interacted with over time that not only have the passion and intellect to be a lawyer, but also to grow a practice. And that's something that, you find people that are great lawyers and you find people that are great businessmen or business people. They're usually not both. Now, obviously, things are a lot different, right? So I started in an attic in Euclid in Dave Nager's office. You kind of started on your own in like a little room
attic
in Lakewood, a little attic in
Yeah.
Lakewood. But what's your practice like now? What's the structure of it?
Yeah. So to be brutally honest, it's still an everyday struggle in terms of finding that mix. And so one of my goals at the beginning of the year was to drastically reduce my caseload so I can manage more. So, I have a goal of, in terms of being a primary attorney, I only want to be the primary attorney on 5 cases by the end of the year. And those 5 cases should be very significant. And then I can help manage and oversee and strategize in the other cases and parachute in. But it seems like every time I sort of knock that down and delegate, then all of a sudden I look at my case list and all of a sudden it's ballooned back up. I'm like, how does this happen? And so I think the reality is it's an everyday struggle. So to answer your question directly, I would say it's probably a 70-30 split in terms of working on cases versus working in the business. That needs to change.
Yeah.
But I think that's a struggle every law firm owner has, period.
I deal with it all the time. I mean, I've been fortunate enough that because now the cases that you have, you can pick 5 or 10 or select some kind of criteria because of the size. At least in terms of like the case value, for me, they're the same. It's easier for me to say, listen, it only makes sense for me to put my footprint here and let other people do the rest. When you when you notice that the number of cases that you're working on balloons, is that more because of the growth of the practice and there's an increase in the number of big cases that you're like, boy, this needs Allen, as opposed to somebody who you're working with? Or is it just a struggle to give it up? Is it a delegation issue?
So, I think it's both. I, I struggle to delegate. There's no doubt about it. There's cases on my docket that aren't super valuable, but say they were a personal referral and I somehow got sucked in and It's at a point, or there's sort of issues that I feel bad about delegating and I shouldn't. Um, the flip side is certainly the firm has grown where hopefully we keep getting more and more significant cases.
Yeah.
But I also need to eventually get to a place where I feel comfortable delegating those significant cases as well, and to say, all right, all these cases are significant. What are the top 5 that would get me up in the morning that I would be passionate about?
What's your team like right now? Who do you have working with you?
So, 3 paralegals, 3 additional attorneys, 4 counting myself, director of ops, marketing, 2 intake people counting my receptionist, and that's sort of the core team. We have an executive assistant that's going to be starting here in 2 weeks. So I'm excited about my team. I feel really good about where our paralegals are right now. That's a first. I think I really struggled with getting a good team around me paralegal-wise, but now I feel really good about it. I think at the end of the day, one of the most valuable lessons that I learned the hard way is you get what you pay for. And, it may be tough to swallow paying a paralegal more than you got paid your first few years as a lawyer. That was the internal struggle I had, but you have to do it in order to get the right people.
Yeah. So when you're out there looking for potential, whether it's a lawyer or a paralegal, somebody to add to your team, are there certain character traits or background skills that you find to be most important in a successful employee in your office now?
Yeah, so number one, I think you need to be hiring based on your core values. And so if you hire based on your core values, then you won't go wrong. So every time I've made a hire that didn't work out, it's because I somehow explained away why they didn't meet a particular core value. And so I can't do that anymore. But overall, in terms of overall attributes, you can't teach hungry. And I think even in every single position that you're hiring for, you have to dig into their past positions and were they hungry in that position? Whether it's say it's a barista at a coffee shop,
Yeah.
and they say, well, I wasn't happy with the way the clothes policy was or system, so I recreated the cleanup system at the end of the day, and I did that on my own. That's hungry. So you got to look for those specific examples when you're hiring to make sure that you're getting the right person. Because if someone's not hungry, eventually it's not going to work out.
Would you say that you're a micromanager?
Maybe a recovering micromanager.
Explain that.
So I think I have a tendency to just want to fix everything. Like the way I used to manage people, when I say used to, 5-6 years ago, they come to me, Alan, here's a problem. And I say, all right, well, we got to do A, B, and C. And that's just, especially as lawyers, that's how we are sort of wired, that we're problem solvers. But if you want to have employees that can actually problem solve, you can't do that. So instead, you got to coach through questions and let them find their own answers and trust them to find their own answers. And then slowly give guidance along the way. But, sometimes I still jump in and say, hey, make sure I see the end product before this goes out.
And just to converse with that thought a little bit, that's something that I've noticed has been a struggle for me over time, and especially as my office grew from myself and 2 paralegals to now, 30 people. All of a sudden, I can't physically be there to give the information to people. I need to trust that I'm making the right hiring decisions. I think, we have an employee playbook, and right at the top of it, I said, I hired you to be a problem solver, not a problem reporter. Document the steps that you go through to solve it, but come to me with the solution. As long as you report to me, we can figure this out. We can fix it. But it's really just I've noticed that I've struggled to sit in the background. So now we have a lot of smaller team meetings and we have some larger team meetings. But when I know the answer, I want to throw it out there. That's like what you said about us being lawyers. We're just there to solve problems, but sometimes to get the most out of the team, it feels like I've got to let them just give them the tools to come to the answer themselves. Um, when you think about like the lessons that you've collected, and I mean, I guess it's been 8 years, but it feels like longer since you started on your own. What are the lessons that you think you're still learning? So not the important lessons that you've learned, but what are you adjusting to now?
I'm still not great at the management of people because I'm so intense. Sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. I can be very direct. So,
Yeah.
A, management of people. B, trusting people. Um, I still struggle with that. But also, number three, I'm better at hiring. Now we have a whole process. We have a hiring funnel, but it's still not great. And then last but not least, and this is something we've focused on this year, is accountability, holding people accountable within, you know, the firm. So I think right now we're trying to create this culture of accountability that's a work in progress. But everyone has to be held accountable because if not, the highly accountable people will leave.
It's so interesting because I'm thinking about the question that I asked you a few minutes ago about are you a micromanager? And it's like, I think we all hate that phrase. Like to micromanage just sounds like such a negative thing, but at the same time, accountability is kind of a part of micromanaging. So how do you draw that balance between, you know, holding people accountable and not babysitting them to the point where it inhibits their freedom to be great employees?
So, number one, I delegated the accountability task to my director of ops.
Okay.
So that's the starting point. But also, I think it's important to keep good KPIs, key performance indicators, that are sort of looking at the broad view instead of the narrow view. And if someone's meeting their KPIs, then um, everything's good, even on the small micro level. So I think by having good KPIs, employees don't see it as micromanagement; they see it as accountability. Whereas if you're going task by task, saying, "Well, was this done?" Yes. Well, did you do X, Y, and Z in the task? I did X, Y, but not Z. Things like that. I think that's where people get rubbed the wrong way.
So we've already just kind of talked about the progression of, your firm over the years, and from an attic to having that office on West 25th that you had, and now you guys have even accumulated some real estate, a beautiful building that you guys have as an office. And this question isn't so focused on the real estate element, just the growth. Where do you see yourself going when you look down the line 10 years from now? What do you hope to look around your office and see?
So you're either growing or you're dying. That's what John Morgan says, and I truly believe that. So, 10 years from now, we want to be a regional powerhouse where, like right now, we have a lot of satellite offices. We want those satellite offices, you know, actually are full of people. And so we want to keep growing throughout Northern Ohio. I think that's important in sort of staffing these offices, but also we need to keep uh, getting top end attorney talent to come to our firm who can also generate business to help us grow. So one thing I've realized the hard way is you can't do it all yourself. And I think especially in the beginning, I just sort of put that on my shoulders and said, I'm going to do this myself. Uh, and now what I've realized is that can get you successful to a certain point. But then once you're to that point, you're like, you know, you got to do something, and you got to have others to help you. So continue to grow, multiple offices, multiple attorneys in those offices, and most importantly, continuing to improve the quality of cases that we're handling.
So what do you do to change case quality over time? Do you just find yourself saying no to more, or is it a change in your marketing to attract different cases? How do you go about that?
It's both, but I think it starts with saying no. And so, if a lawyer keeps referring you dog cases and you keep saying yes, then you become the lawyer that takes dog cases and then they send the good ones to someone else. But if you say no to the dog cases, I only take the good ones, they're going to call you for the good ones, not the dog cases. So I think number one, you have to start by having the guts to say no to the low-end cases. Niche to a certain point that it makes sense. And then, in terms of your marketing, focus on the type of injuries, the type of cases that you really want.
Do you? It's an interesting what you say about how you're almost training your referral source what you do and don't want. Do you ever directly address that other than telling them this isn't something I'm interested in? Do you ever spend time teaching lawyers that might refer you a case what they should be looking for? And
Yeah, absolutely. And, so when we reject a case, we say, it does not meet our case criteria because of X, Y, and Z, and we need X, Y, and Z. But also, one thing that I'm working on right now, and I just got to get it done, is sort of a referral cheat sheet where I can give out to all my referral partners, like, here are all the cases that we're looking for, here are the questions that you need to ask. And so, one thing that I think is intimidating for like a non-med mal lawyer is you get this call, you don't know anything about medicine, and you don't know what's going on, and it may sound all right to you, but also you don't want to feel like you're wasting my time. And so hopefully this cheat sheet will help with that.
I mean, I just think of myself in being in a different practice area. There's been so many times over the years when I've sent you some kind of case, and I'm like, oh, this sounds terrible. Alan's gonna get this person $10 million, and then from a paragraph you go, there's no case here at all.
Right.
And I think that building that cheat sheet can go a long way too. I'm not getting that from anybody else.
Right.
I don't know any other lawyers that are sending me a cheat sheet. I should be doing that with the people that send us cases so that they know what to look for. But so you've talked about where you want the growth to be headed. And this idea that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, what is enough? Is there ever a point where I don't hit the brakes, but I say, okay, I at least don't need to I can pull myself away to spend more time with my kids, or I can at least not focus so much on hiring more people, adding more cases. Is that something that you ever think about, or is it just at this point grow?
Well, it's something I think about, but here's the deal. Gary Vee talks about the thing that motivates him is owning the Jets. You got to have that thing such as owning the Jets that you're driving for, striving for, if you're driven by the hustle. Now, some folks aren't driven by the hustle. That's okay. You can only, there's only so many, coffees and donuts that a guy can buy. But if you're driven by something else, I think you got to ask yourself what you're driven by, and then how do I get there, and then what keeps me going. If I can go to work every day and only do the things that I enjoy, which hopefully eventually I get to, and that drive is still there, why would I stop? As long as I can make time for my family as well. And look, obviously there's a struggle right now in terms of, am I making enough time for my kids? Am I getting home at night when I need to? But the flip side of that is the kids also see the sacrifices that I make for the family. And while it may lead to some tough times right now in terms of not spending that time, I think later in life, those life lessons are going to be invaluable. As long as I'm not saying you shouldn't be home, but like if I'm going to all the games and if I'm doing all my duties, and it's just sometimes on a Saturday morning I can't play video games.
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
It's a conversation that you and I have so often because I'm, just to share a little of my own story, which I'm always chasing this fear of repeating how I was raised with my dad, who, was a lawyer and did very, very well, but part of doing well meant he was gone most of the time, traveling all over the world. And I'm struggling. I really want to find this balance between I want to be able to show up to my kids' sporting events and my daughter's dance recitals and stuff, while still having the successful career that he had. And I think that owning your own time is the best way that you can do that. But it's hard. It's really hard.
Well, I think that, it starts by creating your non-negotiables.
Yeah.
And so, a non-negotiable for me are, whether it be sporting events, dance recitals. Last week, my son at 1 o'clock in the afternoon had a Spanish and French presentation at his school. Now, I don't know, it was kind of silly to go and watch, but that was a non-negotiable. And so at 1 o'clock in the middle of the afternoon, I stopped what I was doing. I drove to his school, and I wanted to make sure I watched that. Yeah. Those are the things that I know as a kid I valued, and be present, which I'm not always great at.
Yeah, it's a struggle.
But I try. So I think it's about creating memories and maximizing the time that you're with. So this weekend, this might be a small thing, but my wife stayed at home, and I just took the 2 kids to see Super Mario Brothers, which is a great movie, by the way. But those are things that are unique. And, certainly we're in the moment together at the movie theater. I can't be on my phone while I'm watching Super Mario Brothers.
Right.
So those type of things, I think you just got to be present and try to make the memories, and then have your non-negotiables.
Well, as always, it's great spending time with you. This is, of course, the Donuts Disability and Discourse podcast, and we did bring in a delicious apple fritter today from the West Side Market, and I wanted to break a little fritter with you and see what you thought of this.
Well,
can I get you to have a piece of this?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'll
rip it off.
I'll say, I got a bone to pick with you first of all.
Go for it.
You're doing all these donut reviews, right? And sometimes you pick these
pick the bone while they're clear.
You pick these fancy donuts. You should be just scoring on a simple glazed donut. It's the classic. I think you measure a donut, baker by the classic glazed, and all this fanciness, you could lose a lot in the shuffle.
Well, one fun thing that I've gotten to experience with you the last few years is our annual drive out to Sandusky to be the MCs of
That's right.
Is it called the Sandusky Donut Eating Contest?
Yeah, the Donut Fest.
The Donut Fest. Yeah. Which is organized, of course, by your brother.
Yeah.
But that's been so much fun. We actually had the distinction of being the MCs when that girl set the world record for most. Those were glazed donuts, right?
Yeah.
Most
absolutely.
donuts eaten in 8 minutes. Did you eat
something like that?
68 of them or 67 of them?
It was insane.
I'm not going to ask you to scoff it down like that, but I am going to ask you
All right.
to tell me what you think of this right here.
One bite.
One bite. A little chilly.
Yep. One bite.
You seem to be enjoying it. One bite turned into 3 pretty quickly.
Good flavor. I'd say the inside could be a little more moist.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I do like the flavor. We'll see how fresh it is. I don't know. In the world of big apple fritter guy.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
I didn't know that about you.
Well, I don't eat them too often nowadays. As you get older.
That's how you keep that physique.
That's right. But I'd say on the apple fritter scale, I give it a 6.4.
A 6.4?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I had a better bite than you, just observing, because mine actually had a solid piece of apple. I don't see that in yours, which may contribute to the lower score. Every bite should have some kind of apple. With the apple, I'd give it a solid 7.5, but I hear you. Well, I just want to once again thank you for coming out, hanging out with me at Roasted here in Tremont, Ohio. And I look forward to many future coffee and donuts and discourse with you.
That's right. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse. Rate, subscribe, and tune in next week for more discourse and donuts.